You are eating clean, skipping processed food, watching your portions, and still not burning fat the way the biology says you should. You are doing the work. The scale is not moving. And the most frustrating part is not the plateau itself, it is the silence. You are being quietly sabotaged by mechanisms that have nothing to do with discipline, calorie math, or willpower. 12 of them. And the most damaging ones are hiding inside behaviors you consider victories. The invisible villain running through all 12 mistakes is the same one. Insulin. Not elevated in a diabetic sense, not spike level elevated, but chronically high enough, consistently elevated above a specific threshold to keep hormone-sensitive lipase, the enzyme inside your fat tissue that physically unlocks stored fat for burning, completely switched off. Hormone-sensitive lipase is not politely discouraged by insulin. It is blocked at the molecular level. Research published in Cell Metabolism shows that even a modest insulin elevation, somewhere between 5 and 10 microunits per milliliter above true fasting baseline, is enough to keep that lock engaged. You do not need a dramatic insulin spike to have zero fat burning. You need barely enough insulin to stay out of the basement range. That is the threshold where most Americans are living, most of the day doing everything they were told was healthy. Let me walk you through the first 4 mistakes in real time. By the time we reach mistake number 4, you will understand exactly why everything you were told about fat burning was a partial truth that left out the part that matters most. Mistake number 1. You are snacking between meals because someone told you that eating every 2 to 3 hours keeps your metabolism running. This is one of the most expensive pieces of nutritional advice ever distributed to the American public, and it has been circulated so widely that it now lives in personal trainer certifications, corporate wellness programs, and mainstream nutrition textbooks. The logic sounds reasonable. Keep blood sugar stable, prevent hunger spikes, avoid overeating at meals. What it completely omits is what happens to fat burning every single time insulin is elevated, even briefly. Every time you eat anything, including a small handful of almonds, a piece of fruit, a protein bar with natural sweeteners, your pancreas releases insulin. The act of releasing it, regardless of magnitude, signals hormone-sensitive lipase to stop. Your fat tissue goes from releasing stored fatty acids into your bloodstream to standing by in storage mode. Insulin rises for 90 minutes to 2 hours, and for that entire window, fat tissue is locked. If you eat 3 meals and 2 snacks per day, you are spending between 12 and 16 hours with insulin elevated enough to suppress fat oxidation. That is not a metabolic window. That is a metabolic wall running across most of your waking hours. Research from the Salk Institute, specifically from Sachin Panda at the University of California, San Diego, showed that Americans were eating across a window of 14 to 15 hours per day on average. Only about 15% had a natural eating window under 12 hours. The fix is not skipping meals, it is consolidating your calories so that a genuine gap of 4 to 5 hours exists between eating events. 4 to 5 hours of no caloric input is the structural requirement for hormone-sensitive lipase to reach meaningful activity. Not 2 to 3, 4 to 5. Mistake number 2. You are doing high-intensity cardio in a fasted state because you heard that fasted exercise burns more fat. The first half of that claim is true. The second half is incomplete in a way that reverses the benefit entirely. Moderate intensity fasted exercise does amplify fat oxidation. A 2016 study in the Journal of Nutrition and Metabolism documented fat oxidation rates approximately 20 to 30% higher during moderate fasted exercise compared to fed state exercise at the same duration. That benefit is real, but high intensity is a different physiological event entirely. When exercise intensity crosses above roughly 65% of your maximum heart rate, your working muscles require glucose faster than fat oxidation can supply it. Your body compensates by triggering cortisol and adrenaline to drive gluconeogenesis, your liver's glucose manufacturing process. Cortisol drives gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis raises blood glucose. Blood glucose rise triggers insulin, and insulin shuts down the fat-burning machinery you went to the gym to activate. A 2018 analysis in the European Journal of Applied Physiology confirmed that fasted high-intensity work produced significantly higher cortisol responses than the same exercise in a fed state, with a worse fat oxidation environment in the 2 hours post-workout. For anyone over 50, where baseline cortisol already runs measurably higher overnight, piling a high-intensity session on top of that elevated floor amplifies the problem rather than the solution. The specific number to know is 65% of your maximum heart rate. An approximate maximum heart rate for adults over 50 is 220 minus your age. At 55 years old, that means staying below 107 beats per minute during fasted morning training. That is a brisk walk, low resistance cycling, or a slow swim, not a spin class, not a boot camp. The biology does not care that you paid for a monthly membership. Mistake number 3, you are sleeping 6 hours or less and believing that a clean protocol compensates for the loss. Nothing compensates for what happens to fat-burning hormones across a chronically short sleep window. The mechanism is not about energy. It is about 2 hormones that regulate fat storage at the cellular level. Leptin, produced by your fat cells, tells your brain you have sufficient energy reserves and permits the sustained use of stored fat as fuel. Ghrelin from the stomach signals hunger and drives food-seeking behavior. A landmark study from the University of Chicago by Spiegel and colleagues, published in Public Library of Science Medicine in 2004, found that after 2 nights of only 4 hours of sleep, leptin levels dropped 18% and ghrelin increased 28% compared to sleep-adequate controls. What that shift means is that your brain starts receiving a signal that says you are dangerously low on fuel, even if your fat stores are substantial. Appetite for high carbohydrate? High-calorie foods increases specifically because carbohydrates are the fastest available fuel when the brain believes it is in an energy emergency. Research from Columbia University published in the journal Sleep found that sleep-restricted individuals consumed on average 300 more calories per day than sleep-adequate counterparts, mostly from high glycemic sources. 300 extra calories from glycemic foods means 300 calories of daily insulin elevation, which means additional hours of suppressed fat oxidation every single day. Not from lack of discipline, from cutting a $2 biological process short. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reports that 35% of American adults sleep fewer than 7 hours per night. That is over 100 million people with this problem operating silently every morning. 7 to 9 hours is the target. For anyone over 50, treat 7 as a floor, not a goal. Mistake number 4. You are reaching for fat-free and low-fat foods because 2 generations of American public health guidance told you dietary fat causes body fat accumulation. The low-fat hypothesis was the dominant nutritional framework in American public health from roughly the 1970s through the early 2000s. It shaped the USDA food pyramid and the labels on every grocery shelf. And it left out one critical piece of biochemistry that matters enormously to fat burning. When manufacturers remove fat from a product, they replace it with something to maintain palatability. The standard substitution is sugar, refined starch, or both. Fat-free yogurt typically contains added fruit syrup or high fructose corn syrup. Low-fat salad dressings replace the oil with sugar and maltodextrin. Reduced fat peanut butter adds sugar to compensate for the flavor and texture change. What this means in practice is that choosing the low-fat version often produces a larger insulin response than the full-fat original would have. Dietary fat does not raise insulin directly. This is well established in the literature on macronutrient-specific insulin responses. Carbohydrates raise insulin substantially and for extended periods. Fat raises it minimally. A tablespoon of olive oil produces almost no insulin response. Replace that tablespoon with a tablespoon of honey. Roughly the same caloric load, and the insulin response is categorically different. Choosing the fat-free substitution deployed across 3 meals and 2 snacks per day for decades kept insulin elevated at exactly the level needed to suppress hormone-sensitive lipase and prevent fat release from storage. Not from lack of effort, from following guidance that was missing the mechanism. A 2015 analysis published in the Annals of Internal Medicine by Chowdhury and colleagues, examining outcomes across over 600,000 participants, found that replacing dietary fat with refined carbohydrates consistently correlated with higher insulin resistance markers and greater visceral fat accumulation. Swapping fat for sugar, which is exactly what fat-free product formulation does at scale, moves the metabolic environment in the wrong direction. And it has been doing this silently, meal after meal, for decades. These first four mistakes share a structural feature worth naming directly. Each one was built by a combination of industry incentive and scientific oversimplification. Snacking every 2 to 3 hours was marketed by the nutrition bar industry, which profits from frequent eating. High intensity fasted cardio was popularized by fitness content designed to look dramatic on screen. 6-hour sleep windows were normalized by a productivity culture that treats rest as wasted time. Low-fat products were built by manufacturers who needed to replace what they removed with something cheaper and more addictive. These were not accidents. They were profitable simplifications that left the mechanism out. The next four mistakes are different. They are rooted in good intentions and incomplete biology education. And for anyone over 50, they may be costing more than the first four combined. The first four mistakes were sold to you. The next four are quieter. They come from biology that almost nobody in the mainstream health space explains completely. And the reason they rarely get explained is that the full explanation undermines products and protocols generating hundreds of millions of dollars in annual sales. Mistake number 5. You are taking branched chain amino acids during your fasting window because the label says they are fasting friendly, and the fitness community has been repeating that claim for over a decade. Branched chain amino acids are 3 specific amino acids: leucine, isoleucine, and valine. They are sold as supplements to preserve muscle during fasting and training. The muscle preservation argument has some real biology behind it. The fasting-friendly claim does not. The mechanism runs through a protein called mTOR, which stands for Mechanistic Target of Rapamycin. mTOR is the master switch inside every one of your cells that decides whether the cell should be in growth and building mode or in maintenance and repair mode. When mTOR is active, cells build new proteins, grow, and replicate. When mTOR is suppressed, cells shift into a maintenance operation called autophagy, the same cellular cleaning process that is one of the primary biological reasons to fast in the first place. Leucine, one of the 3 amino acids in your branched chain amino acid supplement, is among the most potent known activators of mTOR in human physiology. Research from the Lehman Laboratory at the University of Illinois, published in the Journal of Nutrition, documented that leucine acts as a nutritional signal that activates mTOR directly and independently of insulin. Even trace amounts of free leucine in the bloodstream are sufficient to push mTOR toward activation and push autophagy towards suppression. A standard serving of branched chain amino acids contains somewhere between 2 and 5 grams of leucine in free form, meaning it absorbs rapidly and reaches cellular signaling pathways within minutes. You swallow it during what you believe is a protected fasting window, and within 30 to 45 minutes, the cleaning crew inside your cells receives an eviction notice, not from insulin, from a direct hit to the mTOR switch. The fast is broken at the cellular level while your blood glucose stays completely flat. This is the specific mechanism the supplement industry has never had financial incentive to explain on its packaging. A 2016 review in the journal Amino Acids confirmed that free leucine supplementation produces mTOR activation comparable to a mixed protein meal in terms of its suppressive effect on autophagy markers. The label says fasting friendly. The research says the opposite. Mistake number 6. You are drinking fruit juice, sports drinks, or cold-pressed vegetable juices because they are marketed as natural, unprocessed, and healthy. In some contexts, they are. In the context of fat burning, they are among the most effective insulin triggers you can consume, compressed into a form your body has almost no biological defense against. When you eat a whole piece of fruit, the fiber it contains slows gastric emptying and the absorption rate of the sugar inside it. The glucose and fructose enter your bloodstream gradually. The insulin response is real but moderated by the matrix the sugar came wrapped in. When you juice that same fruit, you remove the fiber. What remains is a solution of glucose and fructose that enters your portal circulation almost as rapidly as a glucose solution would in a clinical setting. A 12-ounce glass of orange juice contains roughly 36 grams of sugar with virtually no fiber to slow its absorption. The insulin response that follows is not modest. It is categorically similar to what a comparable amount of soda would produce, which is a comparison the juice industry has spent decades and significant resources fighting against in regulatory and marketing contexts. Research from Harvard University, published in the British Medical Journal in 2013, following over 100,000 participants, found that habitual fruit juice consumption was associated with significantly higher type 2 diabetes risk, while whole fruit consumption was associated with a lower risk. The mechanism was fiber removal. If a glass of juice sits in your morning routine alongside what you believe is a disciplined eating protocol, it is generating an insulin response that locks hormone-sensitive lipase for 2 to 3 hours from the moment you drink it. Mistake number 7. You are not managing chronic stress, and you have never been told that this has a direct and measurable effect on fat burning that operates completely independently of what you eat or when you eat it. Most health content treats stress as a psychological issue, something to address with breathwork, journaling, or better sleep hygiene. Those tools have genuine value, but they address the symptom rather than the biological mechanism that stress activates inside your fat tissue every single day. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone, is not only produced in response to physical threats. It is produced in response to any sustained demand the nervous system interprets as a resource challenge. Financial pressure, deadline pressure, relationship tension, or the background noise of a life running at full capacity. Elevated cortisol drives gluconeogenesis, your liver's manufacturing of glucose from amino acids and fat precursors. That manufactured glucose raises blood glucose. That rise triggers insulin, and insulin locks hormone-sensitive lipase. The sequence is the same as every other mistake in this list. Stress reaches the same endpoint through a different entry point. What makes this particularly damaging is the timescale. Snacking elevates insulin for 90 minutes per episode. Chronic stress can keep cortisol elevated for hours at a stretch, and in people with sustained unresolved stress, that elevation becomes a near baseline condition across most of the waking day. A 2014 study published in the journal Obesity found that women with higher chronic stress levels showed significantly greater abdominal fat accumulation over 5 years, even after controlling for diet, physical activity, and sleep. For anyone over 50, this dynamic is amplified. Cortisol sensitivity at the fat cell level increases with age, meaning the same cortisol elevation produces stronger suppression of fat release in a 55-year-old than in a 30-year-old carrying the same stress load. I want to stop here and tell you something that made this clearer than any research paper did. About 4 years ago, I was running what looked like a nearly perfect protocol. The eating window was tight, the last meal composition was clean, and exercise timing was exactly where it needed to be. My metabolic markers improved over the first few months, and then plateaued in a way that made no sense on paper. It was not until I tracked cortisol through a saliva panel that I understood what was happening. A period of sustained professional pressure had quietly kept my cortisol elevated at levels that were suppressing the fat-burning environment I had spent months building. The biology was intact. The hormonal context was not. Managing that context required changes that had nothing to do with macronutrients or fasting windows. I am not offering this as clinical evidence, and physician supervision matters. But the mechanism landed differently when I had lived the example the research was describing. Mistake number 8. You are eating a high-carbohydrate last meal before your fasting window begins, and you believe the fast starts the moment you stop eating. The fast starts on the clock. The metabolic fast, the one that actually produces the fat-burning and cellular repair effects you are trying to generate, starts at a different time entirely. It starts when your insulin returns to true baseline, and the composition of your last meal determines how long that takes. When your last meal is high in refined carbohydrates, white rice, pasta, bread, sweetened sauces, dessert, a glass of wine, your liver glycogen is topped off to near maximum capacity. Your insulin rises significantly and remains elevated for a sustained period after the meal. Research on post-meal insulin dynamics from the Charles Perkins Center at the University of Sydney found that a high-carbohydrate meal can keep insulin meaningfully elevated for 3 to 4 hours after eating in metabolically healthy adults. In adults with any degree of insulin resistance, a category that includes approximately 40% of American adults, according to data from the American Diabetes Association, that elevation can extend to 5 or 6 hours. If you finish eating at 8 in the evening and your last meal was carbohydrate heavy, your metabolic fast may not begin in earnest until 1 or 2 in the morning. If you are targeting a 16-hour fasting window, You are genuinely getting 10 to 12 hours of metabolic fasting, not 16. The clock on the wall says one thing. Your fat tissue is reading a completely different signal. Research from the University of Illinois, Chicago, from Krista Variety's clinical trials on time-restricted eating, found that participants who consumed a protein and fat-dominant final meal before their fasting window showed a faster insulin clearance, an estimated 90 minutes to 2 hours faster return to true fasting baseline, compared to participants who consumed a carbohydrate-dominant final meal of identical caloric content. 90 minutes of additional genuine fasting is not a rounding error. It is the window where some of the most important fat oxidation signaling occurs. The fix requires no additional fasting time. It requires restructuring the last meal, a minimum of 30 to 40 grams of high-quality protein, meaningful fat from whole food sources, and minimal refined starch or added sugar. The clock reads the same. The fat tissue reads something entirely different. These 4 mistakes share a different structural feature than the first group. They are invisible in ways the first 4 are not. Nobody feels branched-chain amino acids blocking autophagy. Nobody watches cortisol rise from a stressful afternoon. Nobody measures the insulin curve from a glass of cold-pressed juice or a carbohydrate-heavy dinner. They feel disciplined. They look disciplined. And the biology is quietly running a program they were never shown the source code for. The final 4 mistakes are the ones that most consistently appear in people who have already fixed the first 8 and are still wondering why the results do not match the effort. They involve timing precision, and for anyone over 50, they are the difference between a protocol that works on paper and one that works in the body. The first 8 mistakes are correctable with information. You hear the mechanism, understand what is blocking fat release, and can make a change this week. The final 4 require precision rather than substitution. You cannot swap one food or add a supplement and solve them. You have to retrain the timing of your biology, and for anyone over 50, where the margin for error has narrowed compared to a decade earlier, these 4 are where the gap between average results and real results actually lives. Mistake number 9. You fast Monday through Friday with discipline and eat freely on weekends, and you believe the 5-day streak is enough to keep the metabolic benefits running. The research on this pattern is more damaging than most fasting content will tell you. The problem is not what you eat on Saturday. The problem is when you eat it. Your biological clock calibrates continuously based on behavioral signals, primarily light exposure and meal timing. When your eating window opens at 8 in the morning on weekdays and shifts to 11 or noon on weekends, your liver, pancreas, adrenal glands, and fat cells, each running their own local circadian clocks, receive contradictory anchoring signals. Researchers describe this as circadian misalignment. Your body is perpetually recalibrating between 2 different time zones, which means it never fully settles into either one. Data from Sachin Panda's lab at the Salk Institute, from a 2020 study in cell metabolism tracking real-world adherence across hundreds of participants, showed that individuals with more than 60 minutes of eating window variation across days showed significantly reduced metabolic benefits compared to participants who kept consistent timing. The insulin sensitivity improvements, fat oxidation rates, and blood pressure changes that time-restricted eating produces were attenuated in direct proportion to how much the window drifted. The minimum effective consistency for circadian entrainment appears to be 5 days per week with no more than 60 minutes of variation on the remaining 2 days. Not 7 days of perfect compliance, but not an open-ended weekend either. Mistake number 10. You break your fast with carbohydrates first because they feel light, easy to digest, and gentle after hours without food. A piece of fruit, a bowl of oatmeal, a smoothie built around banana and frozen berries. These feel like clean, intuitive choices. They produce a sharp insulin spike that terminates fat oxidation almost immediately after the entire window of careful preparation you just invested. The mechanism runs through mTOR, the cellular master switch that decides whether your cells are in growth mode or repair mode. Breaking a fast with rapidly digesting carbohydrates produces a glucose-driven insulin response that activates mTOR sharply and abruptly. At the exact moment your body was running peak autophagy, the cellular cleaning process operating at its highest intensity in the final hours of your window, you send the most powerful shutdown signal available. The cleaning crew, which had been working for 16 to 18 hours, is dismissed in 30 minutes. Clinical research from Krista Varady at the University of Illinois, Chicago, based on multiple 12-week time-restricted eating trials, supports breaking the fast with 25 to 40 grams of protein before significant carbohydrate content. But even this requires one more layer of precision. If that protein arrives alone as a whey shake or eggs without fat or fiber, a rapid leucine bolus activates mTOR nearly as sharply as carbohydrates would. The more effective approach is to precede the protein with 15 to 20 grams of fat or fibrous vegetables, which slows gastric emptying and blunts the rate of amino acid absorption. The mTOR activation still occurs. You want it to. Muscle maintenance requires it, especially after 50. But when it rises gradually rather than sharply, the final segment of your fasting window completes more fully before the repair operation ends. Mistake number 11. You are exercising 7 days a week because the content you consume makes rest feel like regression. High training volume is one of the most effective ways to silently dismantle fat burning, particularly after 50, and almost no mainstream fitness content addresses the specific hormonal mechanism behind it. When training frequency and intensity consistently exceed recovery capacity, the result is a sustained elevation in baseline cortisol. Exercise is a stressor. Controlled and well-timed, it is a productive one. But stacked daily without adequate recovery, it triggers a chronic cortisol response that follows the same pathway as psychological stress: gluconeogenesis, blood glucose elevation, insulin response, and fat cell locking. A 2012 analysis published in Sports Medicine examining cortisol dynamics in recreational exercisers who exceeded their recovery threshold found consistently elevated resting cortisol compared to matched individuals training at moderate volume. After 50, this compounds for a specific reason. Human growth hormone is produced in its largest quantities during slow-wave sleep. Training volume that compromises sleep quality directly suppresses the same hormonal environment that makes extended fasting valuable for fat burning. 4 to 5 moderate intensity sessions per week with genuine rest days produces a better fat oxidation environment in adults over 50 than 6 or 7 sessions without structured recovery. The rest is not lost time. It is where the fat-burning biology actually runs. Mistake number 12. You are drinking artificially sweetened beverages during your fasting window because they contain 0 calories, and the 0-calorie logic has been the foundation of fasting-compatible beverage recommendations for over a decade. The mechanism that makes this problematic has nothing to do with calories, which is exactly why it has been so consistently overlooked. The relevant pathway is called the cephalic phase insulin response. Your pancreas does not only release insulin in response to glucose entering the bloodstream, it releases a preparatory pulse of insulin in response to sweet taste signals reaching the brain before any glucose arrives. Your body has been conditioned across millions of years of evolutionary biology to interpret sweet taste as the arrival of carbohydrates. When sweetness arrives without carbohydrates following, the anticipatory insulin response fires anyway. A 2020 meta-analysis published in Physiology and Behavior reviewed evidence across multiple human studies and found that the magnitude of this response varied between individuals and sweetener types, but was measurably present in a meaningful share of the population tested. During the final 2 hours of a fasting window, when fat oxidation is operating at its highest daily rate, even a modest anticipatory insulin pulse is sufficient to interrupt the signaling environment. You feel nothing. The beverage registers as 0 on every calorie tracker, and the fat-burning chemistry the preceding 16 hours built toward takes a detectable hit. Black coffee, plain green or black tea, and unflavored sparkling or still water are the only beverages with a documented record of not interrupting the fasting state in the majority of people. Now, I want to give you the protocol that addresses all 12 mistakes inside a structure you can actually execute. I call it the SET protocol. 3 components, each with a specific number, and 1 mistake that invalidates all 3 if you make it. The S stands for structure your last meal correctly. A minimum of 35 grams of protein, a fat-dominant macro split, and no more than 20% of calories from refined carbohydrates or added sugar. This single adjustment accelerates your return to genuine fasting baseline by 90 minutes to 2 hours compared to a carbohydrate-heavy last meal of identical caloric content. 90 minutes of additional genuine fat-burning time per fasting day adds up to over 9 hours of additional metabolic fasting per week, built entirely from meal composition. The E stands for enforce window consistency. No more than 60 minutes of daily variation in your eating window opening and closing times across a minimum of 5 days per week. Set your window open and window close as fixed anchors. Treat a 60-minute drift on off days as the ceiling, not the baseline. This is the adjustment that activates circadian entrainment and makes every other component of the protocol more effective. Without it, the biological timing mechanisms that amplify fat oxidation, specifically the liver's circadian gluconeogenesis rhythm and the pancreas's circadian insulin sensitivity pattern, never fully calibrate to your window. The window exists on paper. The biology operates in a different time zone. The T stands for terminate the fast with fiber and fat first. Before any high leucine protein source, consume 15 to 20 grams of fat or fibrous vegetables. Olive oil on vegetables, half an avocado, a handful of nuts consumed before the protein component of your first meal. This blunts the mTOR spike at the close of the fasting window, allowing the final segment of autophagy to complete more fully before the repair operation shuts down. The protein still comes. The anabolic signal still fires. It rises gradually rather than sharply. And the cellular cleaning crew gets an additional 30 to 45 minutes of uninterrupted operation before the loading dock reopens. The mistake that invalidates all three components is treating them as independent choices rather than a sequence. The most common version is applying window consistency correctly while continuing to break the fast with a protein shake alone, or restructuring the last meal correctly while eating freely on weekends and undermining the circadian entrainment the consistency was building. Each component addresses a different mechanism. The last meal targets insulin clearance speed. The window consistency targets circadian calibration. The fast exit targets mTOR precision at the close of the autophagic window. Remove any one and the other two run at reduced efficiency. All three together produce a qualitatively different metabolic environment than any two in combination. This is not motivation. It is not a 30-day challenge. It is the biological sequence your body was designed to run incorrectly. 12 mistakes that block fat burning, all of them operating silently, most of them while you believed you were doing everything right. The biology was never the problem. The information was. Now you have it. If you are starting the SET protocol this week, comment the word SET below so I can track who is actually moving on this. And subscribe because every video on this channel is built the same way. Every claim sourced, every number real, no filler. One video a week. This is how the biology actually works.